Thank you. Good morning. Everyone hear me okay? Got the whole Britney Spears type microphone going on. Unfortunately, I can't hide it with hair like others can, so I'm sorry about that if it's distracting at all. And also, I keep getting distracted by the bell at the front. I think it looks like a trophy, and I nearly lifted it up. That would have been really embarrassing. But here we go. So thank you for coming along to the conference and, coming to this session. Even though it's a keynote, you don't have to attend, of course. And, in keeping with the theme of the conference, we're talking about effectiveness and is Agile still the answer? And I'm going to give you experiences, stories over the last 12 and a bit years where I've been in different Agile-related roles and where it has and has not been effective. So it's not going to be your typical keynote where I present a model that is amazing and I've never done it anywhere. I'm going to share my mental model for when I work in an organization or with organizations. But also I'm going to share loads of examples where I got it wrong. And hopefully that means that if you're doing the same thing, you stop doing it. Or if you're about to do that thing, don't do it. So I hope that I can prevent you make those mistakes or learn them sooner rather than the years it took me to learn them. We're going to start our little kind of journey on our significant events in Agile history with this chap. Does anyone know who this is? We're off to a great start. It's quite hard to know who this guy is. So this is a chap called Winston Royce. Anyone heard of the name Winston Royce? Yeah, a few hands. Well done. I'll pay you the money later for saying you knew him. Winston Royce is a famous chap because he wrote a paper around kind of 1969, 1970, and it was all about the development of large software systems, large software projects. And it's credited as being kind of the first formal documenting of what became known as a waterfall process, where each phase is sequential. It follows on from the previous one. So here it's kind of, your linear thing of one step follows the other. Now, what's interesting about this paper as far back as the 70s is that Royce actually said that this implementation is risky and it invites failure. And within the paper, he talks about the doing it twice model. So doing it more than once, i.e. being iterative. And that was kind of one of the early foundations when we're talking about agility in the way we deliver projects and products. Around a similar time, 1969, you had the formulation of the Project Management Institute. As you can guess, there's not a lot of agility going on in that picture. And it also looks like it's from 1969. So this is kind of, an accreditation, certification, a body that would ensure what great projects look like. And they'll be relevant later on in our story. Moving on to the 80s, you have this very famous paper, the New Product Development Game. I'm not going to try and pronounce the authors because no doubt I would butcher it and that would be disrespectful to them. But this is all about kind of how product development needs to change and how we actually need to work instead of like a relay where it's sequential and you pass on the baton, you need to operate as a rugby team. I didn't mention the word Scrum, but it mentioned about how a rugby team, they move forward together and ultimately, they're trying to score a try and get points and then win the game. So it was trying to encourage working together to advance down the field to meet the goals that the team has. Around 1989, we had the formulation of Prince2. Anyone familiar with Prince2? Few people crying as I show that slide. So Prince2, again, kind of a process-based methodology for all around how, again, you deliver great projects. I believe it was formulated by the UK government, and it's all about different artifacts that you should be including when you deliver projects, things like project plans, RAID logs, highlight reports, that kind of thing that no one ever reads. Moving on, 1995, first mention of Scrum as a development process. What's interesting is, you see like on LinkedIn when people capitalize Scrum and people say, Scrum's not an acronym. Why are you doing Scrum in capitals? Well, Ken Schreiber did, not as an acronym, but maybe that's one of the reasons why people capitalize it. So maybe don't chastise people when they are capitalizing Scrum and mention it. Then you have the Agile Manifesto, of course, 2001, where 17 white men got together and formulated a set of values and principles around what they think makes great software projects and products work. Then in the years following, you had this Agile boom, where you have things like Agile HR and Agile auditing and Agile marketing and Agile analytics. Basically, whatever your job is, just put the word Agile in front, and then that sounds like you are Agile. And a great example of agility taking further is agility in music. This is from the artist Usher. Anyone knows the artist Usher? Hopefully a few people do. This was a mixtape from 2018 called A. A isn't for Agile, before anyone asks. And what's interesting is this point here, that he knocked out 8 songs during a 5-day sprint. So that's sprints and Scrum making its way even to music. And then we have things like this. Just pause there for everyone to take that in. Then we had, when we get good at things agility-wise, we have to take it further than teams and team of teams and across the organization. This is SAFe 1.0, and it's very simple depiction there. And this is SAFe 6.0, where it's been simplified. Yeah. And then in more recent times, kind of more, I guess, sad news really, kind of, people that are in agility-based roles being impacted from a job perspective. And lots of organizations going through changes, deciding that they didn't want these agile-based roles, so getting rid of Scrum Masters, getting rid of even product managers and product owners in some organizations. And a lot of people kind of negatively impacted. And this is when you see the discussion on social media quite often, is Agile dead? What's next? Everyone starts changing Agile in their LinkedIn header to say AI. And this is sad news. And, it's kind of, I think the consequence for a lot of organizations is not really knowing what they should be looking for, what results should be happening. How do they know that these roles are actually being effective? And then the final kind of bit in our Agile timeline was this most recently. So the Agile Alliance and the Project Management Institute coming together to form an alliance. Generally, I think it's so both organizations can keep surviving. Plenty of people that I know in the Agile space don't really view this as news. But it was significant enough that I mentioned it on the timeline. So this is how stuff's gone through the ages, different landmark events. And I spent last night making sure all of these were perfectly aligned, so please appreciate it. And we come to this point of, well, is Agile still the answer? For me, as a practitioner, I tend to avoid using the capital A word, and I switch more to kind of using agility with a lowercase a. And I think then it makes it more amenable to organizations in their way of working. Agile, whether we like it or not, comes with a lot of stigmatism. A lot of people think Agile equals Scrum and Agile equals sprints, for example. Probably most people in the room would agree that that's not the case. It's all about working with agility in the context you're in. And we're talking about effectiveness, like we mentioned at the beginning, getting the desired results. So being able to evidence that we are having the desired results from working with agility. And, when we're talking about effectiveness, anyone know what this is from? Pokemon, yes, like one of the best games ever, come on. And, when I was putting these slides together, I was thinking about, well, what's a good way to think about effectiveness when it comes to agility? So, in the game Pokemon, for those of you who have not been fortunate enough to play it, you have your different Pokemon and they battle against others and you choose moves, you choose actions that you can take. And at times they are super effective and at times they are not particularly effective. Now, the goal in the game is to end the life of a Pokemon. We're not aiming to end anyone's life today. So let's just be clear. So you can have actions that you take that are either super effective or not very effective. And what I'm going to show you are, over the last 12 years, things that I've done or things that I've witnessed in different organizations where it's been super effective and we can showcase the impact, but also when it's not been very effective, because then that can help you understand why it wasn't particularly effective. But what do I mean by agility? It's a big word. It has many different definitions for people. This is just what I focus on from an agility perspective. If you have a different definition, that's totally fine. But this is kind of my mental model for when I work in an organization and what it is that I want to change. I start with flow. So flow is the movement of work through a particular process, through a board, through a workflow, at all levels of the organization. So team, portfolio, even strategic, goals, OKRs, that kind of thing. Typically, the way to visualize and measure flow is through the use of Kanban boards. Hopefully everyone knows what a Kanban board is, but essentially it's a mapping of your process, your workflow, how potential value is generated from left to right. So in its very most basic sense, you would have a column of to do, doing, and done, and work flows through to the right. Why do we visualize work on Kanban boards? Well, the main reason is that 2/3 of the population are visual learners. So visualizing work on a Kanban board allows people to learn more effectively. And there's a wonderful book from Dominica de Grandes, if you haven't read it yet, called Making Work Visible. Some fantastic insights there around the different ways you can make things visible, how you can measure stuff, that kind of thing. So that's why we make work visible. We want to make it visible so people can learn about what it is we're working on, where they could potentially be enabling or adding value to a particular team. Some examples of Kanban boards over the years, because this is all about kind of applying this in the real world, right? This is a Kanban board, a team of Agile coaches that I was leading around 2018, 2019. This was our Kanban board in the office. Ideas were things that we thought we might do. Candidates were the next things to potentially start. Ready was stuff that was ready to pull. In progress, where we've got WIP limits as well, split between doing and done, and ultimately stuff gets done on the right-hand side, and even the yellow post-it is a little bit of a definition of done for us as a team. But Kanban boards, you can use them anywhere. Here's an example of when me and my wife used a Kanban board for planning our wedding. So we detailed all the different things that it was that we needed to do. Funnily enough, it was my wife that encouraged this, so it wasn't me, before anyone thinks that that was the case. So these were all the tasks that we needed to do. So, you know, things like emailing guidance to our guests about where they could be staying, all the way through to things like payments. You'll notice there's lots of due dates for things. Kanban boards, they should be pull-based systems, right? So when you have capacity, you should pull it, you know, put your name against an item. It's interesting how often my picture is there compared to my wife's. It's debatable whether that was a pull-based system in that regard. But it was really helpful for us when it came to planning the wedding and visualizing everything it was that we needed to do and gradually getting the board with nothing left in the to-do column because the wedding was done. And a third example, and we're going to come back to this one later, when I worked in a technology organization that they wanted to embrace agility, but we quickly realized that, well, we need to do agile projects rather than waterfall projects wasn't really the right tactic. So instead of that, what we did is we applied agility principles at a higher level. So each card you're seeing, that represents a project being delivered in a very kind of traditional waterfall sense. And we're using a Kanban board at a portfolio level to visualize all our projects that go from refinement all the way through to done. And I'm going to come on to that one a little bit later when we're showing effectiveness. So when it comes to Kanban boards, flows from left to right, you've got your different Post-it notes on the board, and we want to try to get them to done. This is great for simple conversations like, well, what did we just finish? What are we working on right now in the build and test column? What's coming next? The stuff that's in analysis. And also stuff gets blocked. It's very helpful then because it should be a question of, well, how can I help? Rather than start something new, like a lot of Kanban boards do. And then stuff moves through to done. You don't know how long that animation took me to do last night and get it all perfect. So appreciate that, if anything else. And then this weird thing appears called throughput. And then another item moves to done, and then this throughput value changes. So what do I mean by throughput? Well, throughput is a number of work items, tickets, cards, user stories, product backlog items, work items, whatever you want to call it, that complete per unit of time. So really, in a good agility-based setup, they should be indicators of potential value. So if our throughput is increasing, that means we're delivering more potential value. And this is great because it allows us to validate things from an effectiveness perspective. This is a team that I worked with about 18 months ago. So on the left-hand side, this was their throughput. So it's visualizing how many items they complete per week. And then there's a summary for that 12-week period of 54 completed items. We did a bunch of changes around the ways of working, looking at things like how we ran stand-ups, incorporating some metrics into our retrospectives, looking at things like how long stuff sat in PR review, and try to change our way of working. And on the right-hand side is the period following those changes that were made. And here we can see that actually we've nearly doubled the completed items. So when we're looking at effectiveness, we can say that, yeah, this is super effective, because we can see that we've increased the amount of potential value that the team could be delivering. And then there's another team that I worked with in a period prior to that, and I educated them all about things like flow and throughput, and how if they increased throughput, they could be showing that they were delivering more value. And they, grabbed me saying, "Oh, Nick, we've got a great example of where we've been more effective." I was like, "Oh, great." It's like, yeah, so, you came to us and we looked at this 6 weeks and we had completed 22 items, and then in the period following, we actually completed 33 items, so we've increased by 50%. I was like, oh, great. I was like, oh, so users must be, over the moon with this. There's more value being delivered. You're delivering more functionality, more value to them. And they looked at me like, what? I was like, well, that's like, if you're delivering more, I would have thought, that users would be happy, and they certainly should be giving you more feedback at least, And they went, what? So that's when we go from, well, is it super effective? It's debatable. And actually, I did a little bit of a deep dive with them as to, okay, let's look at some of this throughput data. This was a team that was building business intelligence data visualization reports for a different part of the organization. So someone wants to see a particular data set visualized on a data platform, and this team would build it. And actually, when we hover on a particular week, in this instance, the 17th of April, 2023, we can see what they were doing is they were essentially taking one kind of backlog item, but slicing it into 3 based on different layers of the technology stack. So we would create the wireframes, we would ingest the data, and then we'd build the visualization. So what was actually 1 item was becoming 3. And really, that's not very effective. Because you're kind of artificially inflating your throughput. So this was an example of where I got it wrong, where we thought we were being more effective in our way of working, but actually, when we dug into it, that wasn't the case. Another thing with flow is we get to track things like when work starts and work finishes. So in a good Kanban system, you have a start line and a finish line. So when work starts and when work finishes. So for this particular team, something moves into build on the 27th of January, and it's been started, and then it continues flowing through, and then it goes all the way through to done. A little bit of a pause there. And then we start to get some data around, well, when did we start it? When did we finish? And this number comes up called cycle time. Well, what is that? So cycle time is the amount of elapsed time between when a work item starts and when a work item finishes. It's typically visualized in one of 2 ways. The most common way is visualizing it as a scatter plot, where each dot represents a completed item, plotted against the date it finished, and then you can see how long that particular item took. And then you have these percentile lines as well, so they can say, right, 85% of the work this team completed in this period took 12 days or less. So coming back to our team where I had increased throughput and they actually were delivering more value, this is a further way of validating our effectiveness, because you could increase throughput, but you could be completing lots of old items. Thankfully for that team, it wasn't the case. We can see the 85th percentile there dropped from 19 days to 9 days, so it reduced by over 50%. So again, when we're trying to show our effectiveness, we can say that this is super effective. We've increased what we're delivering more value or more potential value, and we're doing it quicker than before. Another way you can visualize it is through a line chart, and we look at the average cycle time for items completed in a given period. So each kind of, when it goes up and down, that's a particular week, and it's showing you the average for items completed that date. And then you've also got these error bars. They show you kind of the outliers for a particular week. And I worked in an organization, and Eva, you'll recognize this one from a previous talk. And they were plotting the average cycle time, and it was trending downward, meaning that we were delivering faster. So we were delivering kind of more value sooner. And the coach was saying, it's super effective. Look at me. I'm the coach, and I came in and I transformed this team, and now they're quicker than before. And one of the things that you need to bear in mind is you need to be a bit skeptical. Whenever a coach, just like myself, you should always be skeptical of data when it's presented like that. And we come into this trap of kind of correlation does not equal causation. So just because an Agile coach works with a team and makes them faster, it's not necessarily down to the Agile coach. There could be other factors at play. Just like the correlation of people that die by becoming tangled in their bed sheets correlates with per capita cheese consumption. There's probably not a causal relationship there, but it's just something to bear in mind when we look at this information. What this particular area or coach was doing is they were looking at the median cycle time for items completed in a given week. And median is a very easily misled statistic, a metric. So this example here, someone's wondering, well, why should I invest with your fund? Why should I give you my money? And this person said, well, we've got a median gain of 8% per year, but you can see either side of the median, there are catastrophic losses. So it's probably a bit more of a riskier investment than is advertised. So with this particular team and this area, we needed to start looking at, well, if it's the median, we need to look at the values either side. So the items that are below the average and the items that are above the average. And then we start to look at the whole data set. And then what we actually can see is that cycle time is increasing. So it's taking longer. It's not taking less time, it's actually getting worse. So therefore we can say whatever we were doing, it's not very effective. And we need to think about that in terms of what we want to do with our way of working. And a final example around flow, I mentioned about, not all agility stuff has to be team level stuff. It doesn't need to be like the number of agile projects you're doing versus waterfall projects. This example I showed before, a portfolio of technology projects being delivered in a very waterfall sense, but visualizing the portfolio on a Kanban board. And we kept it very, very simple. We didn't add, much wait states or things like that. And what we would do is we would review this on a weekly basis, and we would start the conversation with, well, what do we need to do to finish those items that are closest to done? So you probably can't read them, but the columns say ready to deploy and validate. So validate is you've deployed it, and you're looking at kind of early life support issues that customers may raise. Ready to deploy is you're ready to deploy, you're just waiting on change advisory board approval. Then you look at the things that are in progress, and we say, right, we're going to limit the amount of projects that we work on at any given time. And when I started working with this kind of portfolio approach, our work in progress limit was 50. So it wasn't what I would call a WIP limit, but that was what I had to go with at the time in order to get the outcomes that I wanted. And then the final part was this part where we say, okay, basically, don't start any of these until we finish something. So until something moves out of in progress or moves to done or moves out of ready to deploy and validate, then you can't start anything new. So kept it very simple. And I'd like to think there's not much agility-related words there either, so it's easier for people to grasp as a concept. So how do we validate the effectiveness? Well, over the quarters, we looked at two things. We looked at the number of projects we were completing, and we looked at the speed at which we're completing. So we would look at that number each quarter and say, well, has this improved? And the number of projects we were completing was going up, which was great. And we tried to say, right, work in 90-day projects. So basically smaller waterfalls, because ultimately that still means we get faster feedback than doing year-long programs of work. And then we would also look at, okay, for the quarter, what was the average time taken to complete a project? And we tried to get around kind of the issue that you saw before with the outliers and the median by showing the error bars as well, so showing like the 90th percentile and the 10th percentile either side. So if there were some outliers, we could catch them and use them as learning. So again, we were able to say, well, this is super effective. We're delivering more, and we're also delivering quicker than before, which is great. But there's a missing part, and really kind of what the core of Agile is about, which is about value. So, in that particular example, it was serving the needs of the organization and disconnected from the value side of things. And that happens in organizations. It's not a case of, well, you aren't Agile because you're not close to value and close to the customer. It's all about kind of what's the best way you can make agility work in your context. So another part of agility that matters to me is value. So that's looking at the impact of what we do and ensuring that we align with the goals and priorities of the organization. Before my current role, I worked at ASOS, an online fashion retailer. One of our key metrics that we would look at would be things like the average basket value and the product revenue per month, because ultimately we want people to buy clothes. We want people to buy our products. So we would be looking at this on a monthly basis and seeing if this number was going up or down. And as you can see on the right-hand side, not a particularly great story there. But the problem with this is that you need customers to buy a product before you know if you've made an improvement, if things have actually moved the needle. And these are very much lagging metrics. And what we needed to do, or what an organization needs to do, is you need to balance lagging metrics with leading metrics. Leading metrics are things that can tell you sooner on in your process or what it is that you're doing if you're on the right track or not. So if you wanted to lose weight, you don't just wait and then weigh yourself at the end of the month. You've got to think about, well, how many calories am I consuming? How often am I going to the gym? What's my daily step count? Because if you take care of those things, then you're going to positively influence your weight, which is your ultimate goal. That's your lagging metric. So what we did at ASOS as an organization, well, still do, but I'm no longer there, is we look at things like, well, how many people are coming to the site? How many unique visitors do we have? How many visits? How many people are adding stuff to their bag? How many people are saving stuff for later? Because then when we make small tweaks to the website, that can inform us sooner on if we're having the right impact in terms of positively impacting the customer experience and the customer journey on the website. So balancing leading and lagging metrics is super effective. Another kind of example of where I got it wrong, in a previous organization, I worked as a product manager, and we were building an internal app where it was a web-based site that teams would go to, and they would fill out a team health check, so very similar to kind of Spotify squad health check, that kind of thing. But we wanted to keep all that data in-house, and we didn't want people going off and doing their own thing. We wanted to keep it semi-consistent. So teams would go to this on a regular cadence, and they would anonymously vote as to how the last few weeks, the sprint, the last month have been with regards to different aspects of their way of working. So me being a typical kind of product manager and that classic bias we have, I was like, oh, this is the best product. Look at it. It's got 4 countries using it. I haven't even had to market it to them. They just organically used it. I've got repeat usage of teams coming back to it. So I can say this is super effective as a product and the stuff we're doing is working. But actually, that wasn't really the case. A metric like Net Promoter Score is quite handy in this regard. I know it gets a lot of flack, but there are times when it is appropriate. So I started to be a bit more skeptical, and we started to track Net Promoter Score. And actually, you can see there wasn't much advocacy for it as a solution, as a product. The overwhelming kind of research that customer interviews led to was they were using it because it was the only tool they could use, rather than actually wanting to use it. And hence the kind of large number of detractors and passives. So I was able to learn that lesson the hard way in terms of building a product and say, well, it's actually not very effective because users aren't really singing its praises. They're just using it because they have to. And that's one of the big challenges when you're doing internal product development is how do you make this appealing so they're not just using it because they have to, but actually it enables them and makes their job easier. When it comes to value and what's important, another thing we can think about is what motivates people and what brings people to work and what gets people excited around the products and features and things it is that they're building. And a fantastic book to learn all about motivation is Daniel Pink's Drive. And within the book, Pink talks about 3 things that motivate people when pay is fair. Because I know people will say, well, just pay me as much as possible and then I'll be motivated. So when we talk about when pay is fair, there are 3 main motivators. So that's autonomy, so being able to choose how you want to work. Certainly for people in the scaled agile framework, well, they could do with reading that. Mastery, being able to improve our skills and services and our craft as developers, testers, agile coaches, whatever it may be. And purpose, working towards something worthwhile. It's the purpose part that I want to focus in on, because sometimes in organizations, you're too detached from value, and you need to still find a way that you can enable teams to get excited about what it is that they're doing, rather than just teams focusing on getting a feature done because someone asked for it. And a wonderful book that highlights this as a concept is John Smart's Sooner, Safer, Happier. And in John's book, he talks about how you can tie linkage all the way from a multi-year strategic objective all the way down to portfolio objectives, portfolio epics, business outcomes you want to shift in a 3-month or less period, and then down to small experiments that teams can run in a 1-month or less period. So ultimately, you can start to see the lineage from the work you're doing on a day-to-day, it could be a task, it could be a user story, how it ties all the way to the strategic objectives for the organization. So one way of doing this that I used when I worked at ASOS is we started thinking about, well, how can our teams better understand how they're contributing towards our strategy as an organization? Because that was one of the main things that our developers were giving us feedback is, I don't know why I'm doing this. So why have I been given this thing to do? Why are we building this feature? How does it relate to the success or failures of the organization? So we started looking at, okay, well, we have initiatives like ideas that come from the business. These then get broken down into an epic. An epic will represent the work of a domain or an area. And then features within that epic will talk about features of the product or the user journey. And then ultimately your backlog items will be your small stuff that your team would do every few days. And a worked example, a real example, I'll show it to you. An initiative was that we did maybe about 18 months ago. It was called ASOS Drops. ASOS Drops was a sneaker raffle solution. So that basically we're getting a lot of bot attacks on the website when we were releasing kind of an exclusive or limited release trainer, and that was threatening the site and threatening user experience. But also we wanted to show to brands like Nike or Adidas that we could enable, you know, those really exclusive products on our platform and not degrade the user experience and not have loads of people get those sneakers and then sell them on. So, you know, ASOS Drops was our sneaker raffle solution, and then this was decomposed into work of different areas such as our web team, our apps team, our notifications team, and then they would then break that down into further backlog items, user stories, that kind of thing. So there's a few examples of their specific part of the journey and the part they played. So how does this relate? Well, we started looking at a thing called portfolio alignment. So portfolio alignment is all about, well, how can a team understand how much of their work aligns with the organizational goals? So if we take, use your imagination of an Agile team that only has 10 backlog items. I know that's quite a wild concept, but imagine they only have 10 backlog items. And then you say, okay, right, does this backlog item have a parent feature? Does that then have a parent epic? And then does that link to an initiative? And if it does, you get 1 point. And if it doesn't, you get 0 points. And even if you link it to a feature and then it stops, or a feature and epic and then it stops, you still get 0 points. So this portfolio alignment for this team would be 10% because 1 out of 10 backlog items link all the way to the portfolio. And within our tooling, actually, within 5 clicks, a team member could see from story all the way to initiative how their work aligned with the organizational priorities. The initiatives themselves, they actually had a cost value associated with them in terms of revenue or cost saving. So you could directly tie that to what the expected benefit would be to the organization from a financial perspective. And then visualize it. So help teams understand their portfolio alignment. How is that changing over time? Is it trending up or is it trending down? And this is super effective. You can start to see, well, is our work more or less or staying the same in terms of its alignment with the organization? But one of the kind of learnings for this and where some teams were upset is that, well, this is looking at our whole backlog. We've got a backlog of 200 items. And I'd be like, 200 items? Why have you got so much? So, oh, just stuff we've identified that we might get to one day. So one of the things that we added to that is the ability to flip between, well, what are you working on right now versus your total backlog. So the goal here is that that bar should go up every time because ultimately you should be working on the right things right now. And we started to see some teams where they had good alignment, but when you filtered on what they were actually working on, the bar dropped. So they weren't working on the aligned items. And this is a great way for teams to advocate for, we want to be working on the stuff that supports the organizational strategy, but also thinking about, do we have the right teams working on the right stuff? So it's super effective in terms of understanding, if you're detached from value, at least how your work is contributing to the organizational strategy, which in itself is value. And another example of where an organization did this, I won't name the name because that would be mean, And they had a work item hierarchy like so, where they would have a strategic objective, then a portfolio objective. Then they would use OKRs, badly. This would then go to epics, features, and user stories. And they would call this their golden thread of value, which is quite a cool concept. I couldn't find golden thread, so let's call it yellow rope. And the intention was the same, right? To show the way that the work aligns. And it was visualized very similarly, looking at the alignment over time, looking at the split of aligned and not aligned work. But what happened was the rebranded PMO that became the Value Realization Office, they started going to teams and say, you need to have at least 85% alignment or your team will not get funded. And the product managers, project managers were like, what? That's news to me. And what happened was, basically, they were committing the sin of Goodhart's Law, where they were using a measure as a target. 85% became the target. So when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure because people will then game it. And much like the example, if you measure people on the number of nails made, they're going to make thousands of tiny nails that are useless. Or if you're going to measure them on the weight of nails made, you're going to get a few giant heavy nails. And I believe this is a real example from a factory. I think it might be in Moscow. So they were committing one of the major sins when it comes to agility in that they were setting a target. So what happened was, and this is a true story, the rebranded VRO would then be going around saying, look at this team. They have increased their alignment to 85% or more recently 87%. They are delivering tons of value. This is great. Let's fund this team. And you can make the case of it's super effective, right? Because we've improved the alignment. Well, that's where we have to get a bit skeptical. So this was in an area that I was working in. I nearly said the name then, that would have been bad. So I started to be like, it doesn't feel like there's been a significant change with this team. I'm going to go probe a little bit further. And what the PM told me in the team was that they'd actually found some dummy items. So they were doing all this in Jira. So they added additional layers to Jira. And what they found were like dummy items, and they were just linking placeholder epics to these dummy items. And it made the number like significantly jump up. And I was like, so how have you done it? And they were like, shh, don't tell anyone. This is actually how we've got the number. Because ultimately, like, they want to be funded, because if they're not funded, they're not going to have a job. And you know, you can't have more motivation than that, right? So this wasn't very effective. So try to avoid the trap of bringing in targets when you're coming to measuring alignment. Third aspect from a culture perspective, from an agility perspective, is culture. So these are the mindset and behaviors that we want to see in our teams when it comes to continuous improvement, working together, and the way we interact with each other. Can't talk about culture without referencing Amy Edmondson and psychological safety. Google did a study, Project Aristotle, where they found this was the #1 factor in their highest performing teams. Psychological safety being, you know, the ability to show up and be yourself, be vulnerable, not be afraid of saying, I don't know, or making mistakes, being direct, being open, and being honest. What it doesn't mean is everyone is nice to each other. Because sometimes I've worked in places and think, well, we've got high psychological safety because everyone's nice, and that isn't what psychological safety is. So if you haven't read it, recommend reading Amy's book. It's a fantastic book, way better than mine. And it talks all about how you can create psychological safety. And one of the tools within the book is this psychological safety survey. So you can run this intermittent periods on the Fearless Organization website. You can run this online if you don't want to build your own tool, of course. And there's a bunch of questions that you can answer anonymously, and that will help you get a sense of the psychological safety in your organization or in your team, depending on the scale at which you run it. So an organization where I worked, and they were like, okay, let's run this in our ways of working department, and let's see what the psychological safety is like. So you get a score based on how positive or negative an answer is. So there were the 7 questions, and as you can see, all of them were above the median, and the person that was running it, they were using this as the reference point for, this is great. We have high psychological safety because we're above the median in every single category. But there was a problem. And we had to dig a little bit deeper. And actually, it's not very effective because when you start aggregating things at this level, when you run it as a one-off exercise, you lose a massive amount of context, not just psychological safety, any sort of team health check stuff as well. And actually, when you visualize the data like so, you can start to see there's a bunch of negative sentiment towards every single factor. And in fact, in some of the questions, like people on this team sometimes reject others for being different, there's kind of less positive sentiment than there is negative sentiment. So what actually happened as a result is we didn't do anything with this information because it was, well, we're above average, therefore we're great, and we've got high psychological safety. Actually, it was missed out on a massive opportunity in understanding, well, the people that have negative sentiment, what could we be doing to improve the psychological safety? And then let's run it again and let's see if it's had the desired impact in terms of improving things. So this is a super effective way of doing it rather than the ineffective way like shown before. Ways to build psychological safety, great tools in the toolbox, I think, that you see out there. Manuals of me, you might have seen some of this on stuff like LinkedIn. So here's Stephen sharing his manual of me, talking about his communication preferences, what conditions he likes to work in, things he needs to work effectively. Like most of us, he needs coffee. Things that he loves doing, things that he struggles with. I like how he put things I struggle with, politics. Does anyone enjoy politics? And if anyone put I enjoy politics on their manual of me, I'd be like, ugh, don't want to talk to them. So this is a great way in terms of helping people understand a little bit how you are. And you can get creative with it. This is a very kind of nicely designed, I think it may have been drawn by himself, way of telling your story. A tool that I've used over the years is a personal map. Anyone heard of personal maps before? Management 3.0, a few hands, great. So a personal map is you start in the middle with your name, and then coming out of the middle, you have different aspects about yourself. So it could be things like where you grew up, where you've lived, where you like to go on holiday, what are your hobbies. There's no rules around what you should and shouldn't share. It's all within your own control. So I might share something about my family, and you might say, actually, I don't want to share anything about my family, and that's totally fine. And then you can take it a level further and start talking about, well, I've got a wife called Nisha, I've got a son, a 2-year-old called Harrison, and we've got a cat called Milo, and either you know Milo very well. And then you can also talk about like where you like to go on holiday, what are some of your values, what are some of your goals. And this, again, is a useful tool because it allows you to understand more about that person. And why am I sharing this? Well, I had an instance where I was working with a team, and we had someone in the team that was an architect. Well, she was kind of semi-in, semi-out of the team, and she was a real pain. Like, she wasn't particularly helpful. She wasn't enabling the team to succeed. She was all process, process, process. And this team had a challenge where they didn't have enough test data for stuff it was they were building. So they would build something, test it against the dummy data that they had, and then they would put it out to production and find there were loads of edge cases the test data didn't account for, and it failed. And I kept trying to say to her, well, we need more production-like data. And she was like, no, that's not the process. You have to use the data that's there. I was like, okay. Spent loads of time telling about Agile and agility, all completely fell on deaf ears. And then one day, it was kind of repurposed a retrospective, and we did a bit of a personal map session. And each member of the team filled this out, and then we stuck them all up on the wall, and we got to learn things about each other. So we paired people up, and then they had to come back and tell the group about something they'd learned about the person they were paired up with. And I deliberately paired myself up with her, to try and learn a little bit more. And she did her personal map, I did mine, we both stuck them up. And we found that we had a mutual passion for the author James Patterson, and particularly the Alex Cross books, if anyone knows those. And we were then waxing lyrical about our preferred ones, and it really helped connect with her on a personal basis. And actually what we started was we started a little book club in the area of the office where we sat, and we could bring in our books and people could take them home, read them, and bring them back. And then, like, within a week, she then grabbed the mantle around the test data and was saying to someone in the compliance team, this is the data we're going to use. If you don't get back to within 24 hours, I'll assume this is okay and the team can start building. And the person never replied. And it was a great learning for me around effectiveness, around agility, and actually nothing agility related really helped, but it was actually getting to know more about her as a person and how that broke that wall down and how it helped her enable the team and set the team up for success. Ways you can track culture in your team from a kind of semi-qualitative perspective. Team health checks, squad health checks, I mentioned them before, framed by Spotify, Spotify squad health check. Different aspects of team working, you rate them red, amber, green, and then you track the trends of those over time to see if they're improving or getting worse. When I worked at ASOS, someone developed a shortened version of a team health check. Because we found that it was quite extensive, a list of things for teams to go through. And he developed this thing called PETALS. PETALS is an acronym, like all frameworks are. And PETALS stands for productivity, enjoyment, teamwork. The A is for average, L is for learning, and S is for serenity. And what would happen is, on a regular cadence, team members would go and they would vote on our team designer platform on a 1 to 5 scale how they felt a particular aspect had been over the past few weeks, the past few periods. And then the A would be the average across all those scores. And it's visualized like so. So it's meant to represent petals of a flower. Now, I know petals of a flower aren't meant to go green, but it kind of works. So it would have the average scores for each element and then the average scores across the whole board. So the goal here, of course, is that we want to use this as a tool to track our effectiveness. So if we run a petals kind of assessment, we see where we are, and then we do some changes to our way of working, we run it again. Ultimately, we want to see some of these scores change, and we want to see more green on our flowers. Here's an example of a real team where I use this. The Serenity score in particular there was a red, so it was 2.3. And then we use this as the basis for a retro. So took a screenshot of it, stuck it on a Miro board, got together as a team and say, okay, what are the things that we're going to do or could potentially do to improve these scores? And the team came up with a bunch of suggestions. They talked about them, talked about why they might be relevant. And then we did a dot vote as to, which would be our top 3 things that we're going to do. And then we would implement those things, and that would be what we would track over time. And as you can see, the scores improved because of the changes that we made to our way of working. So we're able to say, yes, it's super effective. Now, I'll admit I'm not the biggest fan of themed retros. And I think one of the issues that the Agile world has come into recently is people who are in, let's say, a role of a Scrum Master, and they focus too much on the themed retro. It's not necessarily that these are bad, but I've sat in retros where spent 25 minutes describing what Game of Thrones character you felt like this sprint. Yeah? And that's not the point of a retro. It's to identify improvements and to get better. So even things like, Barbie retros and stuff like that. My wife said I shouldn't use that slide because I haven't seen Barbie. But there you go. So focusing on these things alone as this is what Agile gives us permission to do, it's not very effective, right? So I'm not saying that these things don't have their place at all. I'm saying if they become the goal. I remember a Scrum Master community of practice, and they would meet every 2 weeks, and there were 2 discussion points. How do you do this in Jira? And what fun retro have you done this week? That's not what agility is about, right? If you're using this to get better outcomes, great. But if you're just using it because you want to do something fun, that's not really the point. So yeah, what we want to do is we want to be able to track trends over time when we're looking at culture. So we're seeing what stuff is improving, and also where do we want to focus next? So, if we run a Barbie retro, let's look at, how's it improved some of those things? Has it helped us identify where we're going to improve support and suitable process? If so, then great, we can say that it's adding value. But if we're just focusing on running a fun retro, then we're probably missing the point from an agility perspective. And the final part when we're talking about agility, in my opinion, is delivery. So this is how do we go about meeting the expectations of our stakeholders and getting stuff done in a way that understands and appreciates and incorporates complexity and uncertainty. And you know what I'm talking about? I'm talking about deadlines. That isn't me, for anyone wondering. My grey stuff was in the wash, so I couldn't bring it. So we're talking about deadlines. So how do we manage deadlines from an agility perspective? And a lot of kind of school of thought looks at tools like burn-ups and burn-down charts, and they help us plot the progress we're making in terms of a delivery. So we're looking at when are we going to be done? Well, on average, we finish this many things a week, a sprint, and therefore that maps us to we're going to complete by the 1st of October 2018, for example. And again, to show you a real example, this is when I was back as a project manager. I was working on a project called barcoding all parcels online postage. So Royal Mail is like the biggest logistics company in the UK. And back in 2015, what we were doing is we were adding this kind of 2D barcode to all the parcels. So it used to be that they only used a 1D, which is on the right. That's like, you know, when you go to a supermarket and you look at items on the back, that's a 1D barcode. On the left is a 2D barcode. The benefit for the organization was it was more data rich, but it enabled us to avoid fraud as well. So people would actually print fraudulent online postage and would manage to post items, which ultimately meant we lost money as an organization. So we were adding this to the online postage journey. It involved resizing the label. Incredibly rock and roll stuff, I know. And you know what we were doing is we were looking at a burn-up chart. And we were saying, right, this is the rate at which we're finishing stuff per week. And this is the total size of the backlog. And this is when we're forecasted to finish. And I was there running the project meeting saying, we're going to finish by the 5th of June. And that's when we're going to go live. And that's when it's going to be available to users. And it was super effective, but it wasn't really. Why wasn't it effective? Well, it was using what's called deterministic thinking. So deterministic thinking is assuming that only one outcome can occur. And what I needed to do was use probabilistic thinking and understand that there's a range of outcomes that can occur. There's not one particular outcome that can occur. There's lots, particularly when it comes to software and product development. And forecasting is something, probabilistic forecasting is something used a lot, typically in election forecasts. This was for when it was Trump versus Biden, and it was 40,000 simulations were done of the election and looking at how many of those 100 went for Biden versus Trump and how many were tied. The common one that you will probably all see every day is looking at weather forecasts on apps on our phone, looking at the probability of rain and looking at the range at which the rain could occur. So this is from Monday and looking at the rest of the week and saying, okay, this is when rain is forecast. So around 2 o'clock, you might want to pack a jacket if you're going outside. Depends on your risk appetite. Some might just want to risk it with a jumper. So what does that mean from an agility perspective? Well, typically, we take inputs of just the backlog size, the average rate we're doing stuff, and that gives us a date when we're going to finish. And actually, we need to work in ranges rather than absolutes. So backlog size of 20 to 30 items, we finish 1 to 5 items a week. And that means it's going to take anywhere from 4 to 30 weeks to complete our project. And you're probably sat there thinking, well, that's great, but I can't really say 4 to 30 weeks to stakeholders. And you're right. So what we would do is we would have our burn-up chart. And what we would do is we would run some simulations based on that range of like 1 week it's 1 item, 1 week it's 2, 1 week it's 1 week it's 5. And then we'd do it again and we'd do it again. And then what would eventually happen is we get this kind of distribution of all the different forecasts that we've done. And what we can start to do is we can start to assign percentage likelihoods to a particular outcome occurring. So depending on your risk appetite, you can start to see, well, if I take on this much risk, when is it likely to be done? So you see that kind of slider there is going all the way from 50% to 70 to 85 to 95. And the number of weeks is increasing depending on my risk appetite. So I probably don't want to be 50%. I might want to go for maybe more 70% or 85%, and I can use that to project when it is that our project is likely to finish. And what we need to do is we need to move on from project plans, delivery plans, product rollout plans that forecast a single date, and we need to understand there's a range of dates and probabilities associated with them. Because our stakeholders are a bit like Queen. Queen, you know, the song I Want It All. So, you know, invariably stakeholders are like, well, I want everything. When's it going to be done? So if it's a case of I want it all, let's look at, well, we've got 141 items on the backlog. When are we likely to complete 141 items? So we can say that, well, we're 85% likely to be done on or before the 11th of August if you want it all. And then they might turn around and say, oh, that's great, but I actually had this date in mind, so I want it now. And well, maybe not I want it now, but like I want it soonish. So if you've got a deadline, you can start to say, okay, well, if you've got 6 weeks to complete, then what are we going to get through in that 6-week period? And again, we can start to say, well, 85% likely we'll finish 16 items by the end of the 6 weeks. So if you're coming to us with 50, it's not going to happen, right? We're being more realistic around managing expectations from our stakeholders. So how is this relevant to my example where I was saying we're going to go live on the 5th of June? Well, if I'd applied the same techniques, you'd see the expectation, I was very foolish. It was like less than 5% likely we were going to make that date. And I learned this the hard way when I had the CIO call me up and say, why is this project so delayed? And I was like, so now it's Agile, isn't it? And actually, the reality was it was around the 90th percentile when it went live. So if I'd have had that information at that point in time, I would have made a more informed decision, but I had to learn that the hard way. And maybe some of you out there have learned that the hard way as well. So if you're not incorporating probabilistic thinking when it comes to delivery, chances are you're going to leave with some upset stakeholders. And so yeah, it's not very effective. Here's an example of how you can be more effective from a burn-up side of things, looking at the range at which we're completing work, the rate at which we're adding stuff to the backlog, and using that to forecast end dates for when we're going to finish. So here we've got this kind of landing zone, if you will, for where our project's going to be done. And this is great because it allows us to see, well, when are we going to be done? And also, what levers do we have to control when we're going to be done? So we're looking at things like not just the team getting faster or adding more people to the team, but looking at scope, because ultimately scope is what our stakeholders control. And that's a replay of a real project, by the way. So this is super effective. It allows us to incorporate uncertainty and show stakeholders the role that they play. And if you're working towards a deadline, another visual you can use is this one. This is, again, a real example. Team backlog back from 2017. Backlog in priority order. We've got a deadline looking at what are we likely to get to by the end of that deadline. What's probable? 85% more likely. Possible below that is less than 50% likely. So we want to focus on that marginal scope. What might we do to get those things done? And again, here's an example of it in practice. And yes, I say it's super effective. So coming back to the reason why we're all here, is Agile still the answer? And I would say yes, but only when you're able to use it to evidence its effectiveness. So if you just think Agile is the answer by default, and you can't show the impact of agility in your way of working, then don't be surprised if people are questioning the value that Agile brings. If you're able to showcase, hopefully like you've learned today, its effectiveness, then chances are it's going to be a lot easier conversation when showing agility is the way forward. So a summary of kind of what I think agility is all about. I focus on 4 things: flow, so the flow of work, value, understanding our impact and alignment, culture, the way we work within our teams, and then delivery. So how do we get stuff done? How do we incorporate uncertainty and complexity? And as a thank you to all of you for coming today and sitting through this session, I have a book that's just come out in the last week, and it's all stories, examples within this talking about agility in the real world, and it's called Real World Agility, funnily enough. If you go to that link, you'll get a link on LeanPub where you'll be able to download it for free, and feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn if you want to learn more about it. And there's also going to be time for 5 minutes of questions, I think. And funnily enough, 5 minutes of questions and 5 physical copies. So if you want a physical copy, you're incentivized in true good heart's law with asking questions. So anyone asks a question in the Q&A, you can grab a physical copy of the book as well. That's it from me, dziękuję, and thank you for coming.
Hi, Nick. It was a really awesome talk. I watched it online, so I was happy that you changed some slides. I have one question, because you mentioned you observe the data, you see the charts. What is your favorite time of the day or of the week to look at the data? And do you do it yourself ahead of time meeting the team or with the team?
Oh, good question. I probably avoid like Monday morning. because typically it includes the current week, so everything's going to be at 0. It's not very motivating. I definitely review it ahead of time, so I can at least kind of prepare for questions team might ask. But I'd say kind of like Wednesday, Thursday, middle bit of the week, not a Friday. No one wants to look at data on a Friday. So yeah, Wednesday, Thursday will be my favorite days of the week, and probably in the afternoon.
Yeah, so thank you for destroying a lot of myths during this presentation. I've got 2 questions, but quick choosing. Okay, the first one. There is a really common practice to estimate our tickets, and obviously there was nothing about story points. There are subjectives, and I know all this stuff. But I have a question to you: is it worth to combine estimation techniques with those flow metrics?
I would say if you want to, there's nothing stopping you. That would be a very political answer. In my opinion, I think story points as a practice need to die. But I think the way I learned that is through combining techniques. So I would look at things like the forecasting, and I would look at it with points and then just looking at count. And I saw that there was no difference. So I had to go through that learning and see it myself rather than just, I'm going to drop story points because someone at an Agile conference told me to. So if you want to combine them in that sense, I think that's good from a learning perspective. But if you'd have asked me a few years ago, I'd have said, stop using story points and stop talking to me. But now I think I'm a bit more pragmatic. So if you want to combine them, go for it. Anything that ultimately is trying to help you get better, then I think it's worth a try. A true politician's answer that.
Now I'm a bit afraid to admit that I'm a PM, but my question is related to my role. You mentioned a delivery date range instead of a set deadline. And I'm a bit afraid of how it works out in our day-to-day world when we work against certain delivery dates for our customers. They don't usually set delivery ranges, they set dates. So how did you work with your stakeholders to get them from a set deadline to a delivery range with a certain probability? How did you convince them into that approach?
A combination of, a lot of them had scar tissue from when they've been let down with deliveries in the past. Some of it practical exercises to show them. So kind of, give me an hour of your time and I'll show you the difference in this approach versus the other. The other instance will be still communicating a single date, but assigning the probability with that when you communicate it. So, okay, what date are we going to be done? 85% likely this date. So rather than like showing the range of like 50% this, 70%, because then they'll be like, well, what date do I pick? And then that led to more conversations. So what does this 85% mean? Can we be more certain? And then you can show, well, we can be, but the consequence is that the date changes. And also, I found that stakeholders are very used to getting the updates from a delivery perspective on a weekly basis via a PowerPoint. The way to sell it to them is, well, you can go to this link any time of the day and it refreshes overnight, so you can check the delivery date every day, every hour if you want to. So you put a lot more control back in their hands. So it was all a combination of those things. I wouldn't say there was one standout thing. I think it was doing all those in tandem to help get the message across.
It's going to be the last one.
There's a lot of pressure now on this question.
Nick, following on that one, which tools were you using for making this probabilistic forecasting? Like, how did you gather this information and show it made available for stakeholders?
So shameless plug, I build all my own tools, but I make them free, so they're all open source. So in the book, or if you go on my GitHub repository, they're like Power BI templates. So like BI tool, it hooks into Jira or Azure DevOps and it will create it all for you. And all completely free. Because again, when I was learning as a practitioner, a lot of stuff, it was, you had to pay for it, or your data was going to another company. And like, I never see any of your data. So I try to help people in that regard in terms of, well, if it's free, there's no reason not to use it. Cool. Thank you.